The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to another great webinar from CPA Academy. My name is Autumn and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar on Diversity and Inclusion One-on-One, the Small Business Challenge. Our presenter today is Jina Etienne with guest speaker Michael Lee. Before we get started, I wanted to go through some housekeeping items and do some technical checks to make sure everything is working. If you don't mind going to the GoToWebinar Questions tab on the control panel and letting me know that you can hear my voice and see the title slide. Feel free to also let us know where you're chiming in from. I enjoy seeing where everyone is calling in from all around. Go ahead and let me know. Molly says she is here. Where are you calling in from, Molly? Fantastic. All right, and Texas, Puerto Rico, Illinois, welcome. And if anyone has any technical issues, please let me know in the questions panel. I'll do my best to get around to as quickly as I can. This is also where you can put questions and comments for our presenters. Now that I know that everything is working, let's go through some housekeeping. This is a 1-hour webinar and qualifies for 1 CPE credit. The way you earn that credit is fairly straightforward. Just stay logged in for 50 minutes of our allotted time and answer the poll questions. We'll have 4 polls, and to earn full credit, you need to answer at least 3 of them. If you're on a mobile device, make sure you need to click your answer a few times and scroll down to find that submit button. And if you have to log out and log back in for any reason, our system will keep track of your time. I wanted to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and the archive, along with your CPE credit, will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. We also recommend that you download today's presentation materials, which can be found in the Control Panel's Handouts tab. Now that we're all set, let's welcome our presenter. Janat, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. And thumbs up, Michael, you can hear me?
Yes.
All right, and I can hear you. Perfect. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. And I do want to let you all know that this series starting today is now a bi-weekly series. It'll be every other Friday. And Michael, you're the first of the bi-weekly series. We had some guests in February that we wanted to amplify the African-American voice during Black History Month. And so now we resume our normal series. Starting today, we're going to be talking about the Small Business Challenge with a small business owner. Well, I don't know how small your small business is, but I'd love to introduce you all to Michael. Michael Lee is, let me look at my notes here. He's the CEO of Reconciled, a virtual bookkeeping firm. He's also a serial entrepreneur. He's co-founder of Humnly, which provides on-demand HR services, and Saasable, which provides recurring revenue metrics for accountants. And I mean, we're accountants, we love metrics. I met Michael a few years ago at a D&I event in Boston, and we've stayed in touch over the years. And then last summer, we really jumped into a series of conversations around D&I and the impact. How can you respond to D&I, particularly in a small business, when business and industry, quote unquote, is getting serious about D&I? And so, Michael, I want to come back to some of these questions that I just brought up. But first, welcome. I'm so happy you're able to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, I want to start with a question. And that question I ask everybody, and it's why. As in, why is this topic important to you?
That's a great question, Jana. And obviously, as you probably can tell from my picture, I'm Asian American, and I was born and raised here in America. And I think the topic of D&I probably relates very much so to just all my experiences growing up as an Asian American in Arizona, and predominantly, white and Hispanic context, and kind of feeling like I was always trying to find ways to feel included, right? To feel like myself, and I never fully felt that way in really any environment. I didn't feel that way at home, being raised in an immigrant home, but within American society, I didn't feel that way at school. And when I started in the workplace, I also felt kind of those same things. And so this topic is really important because it's kind of been the story of my life, trying to find my tribe, trying to find where I feel included, and never really fully feeling like I ever fully get there. And I think many people, especially BIPOC people, they feel this way. They feel like, how come I never fully feel like I'm there yet. And obviously, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I get the opportunity to maybe create a space that I've always wanted and do that for my employees as well as myself. So the journey I'm on is not just for myself, but it's also for the people that I employ, the people that I interact with, and the people I get to influence.
You know, that really resonates with me because, and if it resonates with me, I'm hoping some of our attendees today, because one of the reasons I started my own firm was the exact same thing. It was, you can find a place that's your own, and not just to define it on your terms, but create the space that you were seeking, that inclusive space that's representative of a broader community, you know, than just, I mean, accountants are great, but we tend to be homogenous, at least historically we've been. So, and there was a phrase you said, BPOC or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And I just wanted people to know what that term meant. So before we jump in, I gathered a whole bunch of stats, as you can imagine. I'm my stereotypical accountant self. And I want to share these to provide some context for our conversation. And I also want to invite everybody, please, if you have questions, we do plan to tackle anything we haven't addressed toward the end, but throw them in there. And I'm going to be watching for questions, and I'll be the one to throw them at Michael as we go through. So the first thing is, this article, it actually came out back in 2014. And one of the things the author says here is that there's this perception that small businesses are at a disadvantage when it comes to D&I, and that D&I is hard to do if you're running a 5 or 10 person shop. And what makes matters worse is that small business owners tend to fall into the trap of hiring people who like me. And so they tend to be a homogenous group. Now, this particular article, the author of this article lived in Vermont. And at the time of writing it, he writes how he just only learned that 96% of the people who live in Vermont, 1.3 million, are white. And so then he says, what if we think beyond race? And when he says think beyond race for small business owners, think about, he had some questions here in the article. And when you think about your organization, if it's a small business, do men and women have the same opportunity in your company? Does the firm or your company welcome members of the LGBTQ community? Does everyone go to the same church? Do you all go to the same bar? Has anyone served in the military? Or what about the experiences? Do you have somebody who used to work in big corporations or a nonprofit? Or those are different ways to look at your, so you might all visibly be white, but there's diversity if you try to think beyond race. So this is a great article. I just realized I probably should have put a hyperlink in here. But with the title, you should be able to find it. Everybody hopefully has heard of this report. This is in 2015, soon to be refreshed, as I understand. And McKinsey came out and said, no causation, but definite correlation between diversity and performance. And what they said is that when you, and this is also focusing on leaderships, by the way, so not the broad employee pool, but when you see leadership, that's gender leadership or racial leadership, diversity, gender diversity, or both, in the C-suite, businesses perform better. That's what the data shows. And I found this article, and I'm thinking of you now, Michael, because of all of the things we just talked about. I mean, if there's anybody out there innovating and thinking about what's coming and then trying to adapt for that, this article says there's a correlation between innovation and diversity. And because so often we think racial diversity and we don't think about diversity in terms of thinking. And this author says that for firms and companies trying to improve diversity and fostering inclusion, and they said that is truly lived, it can embed this innovative mindset into the company. And then this last article. This one absolutely made me think of you. It's actually from Forbes. It was written in February, so it was only a month ago. And the guy who wrote this is also based in Vermont. So it's just a coincidence that they're based in Vermont, which is where you are. No, you're in Vermont, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So his organization was an on-site company. So they all work together in an office, which of course your company doesn't do. Pre-COVID. As a result of COVID, they shifted to remote work. and it changed their recruiting strategy. Their recruiting strategy went national. Today, their staff is more diverse than ever, and January was a record sales month for them. So he's thinking about that McKinsey correlation causation and says, do you think the fact that his company is more diverse and has been at its most profitable is a coincidence? And he argues that it is not. And I immediately go back to the conversations we were having over the summer, because if I recall, your concerns, your thoughts, and immediately in response to all of the social unrest in the conversation wasn't about hiring for racial diversity, right? They were bigger questions than that. So can you talk a little bit about how your company is and now you have multiple companies, how has diversity influenced your thinking, and where is it that you've had to prioritize those conversations?
Yeah, those are all great thoughts. So the first thing I've always said since I started Reconciled, my online accounting firm, and since day one, and now we're at 50 employees. We've got employees in 10 different states working from home. I've said to everybody that I've wanted to build a business and an employee base as diverse as the customers that we're trying to reach. And since the customers we're trying to reach are entrepreneurs and small business owners across the US, well, that's a very diverse set of people. And if I only wanted to reach a certain type of customer, a specific demographic or a specific group of people, then I may be better suited in reaching them with the same kind of homogenous group of people to go after them, because they would then feel like, oh, we can resonate with your team. But instead, we're serving a very diverse group of customers. Entrepreneurs and small business owners come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all religions, all ethnicities, all political stripes, right? And all genders, all sexual preferences, you name it. And so I've always said in our interviews, when we interview candidates, to our team that's leading hiring, that we want to represent that diverse set of customers. We want to be able to have our customers relate to our team and relate to somebody on our team that represents them. So you can feel like they can see themselves accessing the services we're providing, not from a stranger or from a strange place, but from somebody who gets them, who can connect with them. So that was really important. So for me, it really was not a checklist strategy. It really was a business strategy. It was at the core. If I wanted to build a big services brand that Reconciled wants to become, then it was really important that I kind of attracted and inspired people from across the country to come work with us, and then to come serve the diverse set of customers that are coming to work with us as well. And so that's what's been really amazing. And then through last summer, the first and most important thing to me was, because we already had a diverse set of employees at our company, the most important thing to me was how were the BIPOC employees feeling?
Mm-hmm.
How was this impacting them? And how often is their workplace and the leader of their company, how often in the past have they been ever asked, how are you doing? What's going through your mind? How is this impacting the work you're doing every day? Instead of what probably most of us have experienced at workplace, when we're dealing with things happening socially, or we're watching things that are painfully related to our community of color or our community that we come from, it's never brought up. It's like it didn't happen. It's like you can only talk about it with the other people that fit that same identity, and
When
you don't have
nobody else is in the
coworkers.
room, by the way.
And no one else is in the room, exactly. And when no one else is in the room, and so it was important to me to let everyone know. And I run all my organizations, all the companies I've run, but especially Reconciled, very transparently and very openly, and they know that about me, and they know that about the culture. So I didn't want them to think that it wasn't bothering me, that and this was well before the summer, where we had, because of COVID, a lot of racial hatred towards Asian Americans. that they were experiencing because of COVID. And I had that personal experience in my own family members' lives, my own relatives' lives, and stories from that. And then the things that happened with the African American community and the Black community in America. And so I'm sitting there going, wow, I have to talk about this and not be quiet, but also I need to engage our team and start with our BIPOC employees, but also engage and encourage and challenge and bring in all our employees, our whole team, and talk about, now this is not a exercise of looking good. This is an exercise of this is a conversation that's important in this company if we want to serve our customers well, and if we want to be a better company, and not just not just be
another
perceived that way, just another, or just be perceived that way. We actually want to be better internally, and we want to impact one another, and for people to know that there are employees that are really in pain. There are coworkers in pain, and they need your support, encouragement, and they need to hear your voice. Yeah.
So I have to say, audience, we forgot about the polling questions. So we should probably do one real quick. Maybe Autumn, we can do the first one. And Michael, our cameras disappear while the questions are open.
All right, here is poll number 1 out of 4. As a reminder, you will need to answer at least 3 of them to earn your CPE credit. And they are curious to find out, how big is your company? I will leave each poll open for about a minute to make sure that everyone gets their votes in.
We're focusing on small business today, but we know diversity is an all business, every business issue. It's a societal issue. So it's going to be interesting to see how many people join us, even though the topic says, small business challenge. So, and I see the responses coming in. It looks like most attendees are either a sole owner or in 500 plus employee organizations.
Wow. That's a range.
Yeah. It's quite a...
All right. Great. We'll leave this open for a couple more seconds. Going to close it here in 3, 2, and 1. I will share those results. So 33% with over 500, 24% with sole owner, 17% less than 20, 14% 21 to 100, and 11% 101 to 500. Back to you.
Well, so I'm a CPA and I don't do spontaneous math. And does it matter that my camera isn't showing, Autumn?
There you go.
Oh, where did I come from? Anyway, something like over 50% of people are either in the small firm or the big organization. And so I just thought that was interesting. Now, you were talking about listening to your employees and ensuring that they feel validated. How much of this meant something to you? You touched on an issue that's been really getting press attention, which is the vulnerability of our Pan-Asian community because of just ignorance and saying, and so how did you feel like, as the owner of the company, you could be part of those conversations, or did you feel that you needed to be the only one, you needed to create a space for the conversation, but then, step back?
No, it was important for me as the owner to be part of them because it meant something personal for me, and but also I wanted to send a message to the organization and to the employees also dealing with this, that this was meaningful for the company at large, and that with the support and backing of the CEO and founder of the company, that there would be meaningful spaces for conversation, meaningful implementation of long-term decisions around strategy and how our company would execute on what we mean and the values we have, and also continue that conversation. So I didn't want it to be something short-term, and also one of the reasons why I had reached out to you, because I had met you and it said, how do I ensure that this is a long-term part of our company and not just something that happens this year or this summer, and creates the space for everybody who wants to be involved can be, and also encourages other people to know this is a central part and a meaningful part of the leadership's strategy and the way they view growing as an organization.
So speak to those owners that are attending, because we actually had Well, half of 33% were in 500 plus, but everyone else is in an organization with fewer than 500 people. So if you're the owner or you're in the C-suite in one of these organizations, how do you wrestle with, I want to be part of this, but I don't want to squash people from feeling that they could say what they really felt? Because there's a danger of, well, the boss is here, so we just have to agree with whatever he or she says, and I can't say
Yes.
what I really feel. So how do you think business owners can navigate that space or that challenge?
Yeah, that's a great challenge, especially if maybe you don't identify as with as BIPOC, right? And you're a leader or the owner of the business, which is most commonly the case, And so one first is in what I did, and because even though I have the background of growing up as a minority and be feeling very much kind of out of place in many circles, I started out with just talking to employees one-on-one and listening and hearing about how they're processing things. And I also talked to employees who I knew wanted to be engaged in the conversation but didn't know how to be. And maybe they also didn't identify as BIPOC, but they really cared about the conversation. Listening to them, hearing them out, and asking those employees their thoughts, their ideas, how, if they had control, if they had the say of what things could look like, and what changes could be made, and what programs could be, or what strategies could be taken at the company, what would that look like? And so it doesn't mean necessarily that, me as CEO or the audience as if they're sole owners or if they're the leaders of the organization, that they have to be the one in charge of the programs. But I would encourage them to be involved and to empower, and to say, you are getting executive level sign off on implementing, talking through, working through these issues, and really making it a part of our organization. Now, that with that comes accountability, because if nothing happens or you don't continue to encourage your team, the group of people that are involved, to keep at it and to keep going, then it may feel like or sound like lip service. And so that's the challenge with it. And also, it doesn't stop you still running your business. It doesn't stop your employees that still have to do work. So you got to find the time and make the room to have those conversations as well as a group. So that's really important as well. But I would encourage everybody to get involved as to the best of the ability as possible, and also to be a learner, be inquisitive, ask questions, and your employees probably have even better ideas than you will have in your company.
Shockingly, employees have ideas. It's just making sense. You said accountability, but what do you think about funding? Because some of these take what you just talked about. You put your ideas together, you have time to explore them and talk about them. But what happens when those ideas cost money?
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance that out as the business owner, especially in times where some companies are running lean because of COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. We all make investment and funding priorities in our organization. So I like to ask it a different way: is what is a priority in your organization, and what is a priority gets funding, right? If this is a priority in your organization, you want to be realistic and honest about with the group. Is there a budget? Right? Is there a budget to implement some things, whether it's marketing related, sales related, branding related, mission statement related, group exercises, whatever, hiring consultants? You want to be honest, and you want to be able to say, is this valuable to me or not? Because at the end of the day, what you fund and what you pay for does tell the organization the pecking order of investment, right? And so
they also tend to
have
be
an
the
honest
things
look
that
at that.
succeed, right? If you fund it, it tends to happen.
It tends to succeed. It tends to have return. And not only that, you can hold yourselves or the people involved accountable to what are some quantifiable, both quality and quantitative returns we want from this investment, right? So when you put money into something, you actually can start measuring it, and you can start saying, what are those measurements? Whether that's, hey, we have better retention of BIPOC employees. We're hiring people from more backgrounds and more places. We're seeing more and better applications and more quantity of applications from people from different backgrounds. Those are all different measurements you can tie to the things that you're spending on related to this topic. So I think that's all very important as well. You know, and there's a whole range of things that can be worked on. It's endless to think about, you know, what the opportunities are. So the other encouragement is don't try to bite off everything. Pick a lane, pick a
Yes.
initiative, pick something that you believe you and your team can execute on.
Which is a perfect segue into our next poll question. I guess we can ask it now, which is the one about how the company's addressing autumn, the second one. Which is that?
Yes, there we go. How much do you think D&I impacts small business?
Yes.
Yeah, do you feel there's no impact, some impact, significant impact, it's a game changer, or not sure? Again, I will leave this open for about a minute.
Something you said, Michael, while that's open, I'll just throw it out there. You said priorities get funding. And then I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, but also whatever's established as a priority is how you get measured as the executive. If we're measuring your performance, not just the financial performance, but your performance as a leader. So if you put money into the D&I space, then in theory, you'll be evaluated based on those results.
Exactly.
All right, great. It's going to be closing this poll down here in 3, 2, and 1. I will share those results. It looks like 38% said significant impact.
That's exciting.
Back to you.
What I love the most about that is only 4% said no impact, which means the majority think there's going to be some degree of impact with respect to D&I. You mentioned something at the very beginning of this, that you said the companies that buy accounting services and bookkeeping services are diverse. So your organization is diverse. Do you feel, though, given the nature of accounting, that even if your organization wasn't diverse, maybe you'd still be as successful as it is? Or do you think they're actually interrelated, the diversity of your organization and the success in the space? Because we know accounting is still predominantly white in terms of the executive leadership of the profession.
That's a great question, and I don't know if I can answer it scientifically. Meaning, I don't know of a study, and we haven't done a study of, well, if let's compare ourselves to another successful online accounting firm and measure the success of a homogeneous environment versus diverse environment. All I can say is that the types of customers we seem to attract and are working with seem to represent a very diverse set of people across the country, from different states, backgrounds, genders, ethnicities, political viewpoints, and our employee base continues to get as diverse as that. And so there are not many environments I've worked on in the past where that's been the case. In accounting and outside, in not accounting, there's not many. And I don't remember the last place I've worked where this was even a conversation. It was never talked about. So that's the kind of the other thing I think about in this. I do truly believe the strategy and the team, the makeup of the team, the diversity of this team greatly impacts and gives us a significant competitive advantage. And I don't necessarily need a study to prove that. I can see that in our performance. I can see that in the diversity of viewpoints brought before the leadership, diverse viewpoints brought amongst the team, and I can see that in the way the different viewpoints make everybody at my organization a lot better as people and a lot better as professionals.
And I would argue that your business has been very successful and is continuing to grow. So just like that gentleman said in the Forbes article, if you're growing and you're successful and you're diverse, is that a coincidence?
Exactly.
And I would argue that you might think not.
Yep.
So I want to remind everyone, please put your questions in as we go along. There's one that's here that I do want to bring up. And it's really the last point. So I'll read the whole question. With regard to conversations, policies, and practices around DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, how do you ensure there isn't a checkout by those in the majority who are typically male and typically white? And so by that, I think what he's asking is, so we put out these initiatives and these strategies and we bring these groups along, and then your white male colleagues and professionals just check out. They're just like, whatever. And either because they're not part of the conversation, they're not reflected in the conversation, and they don't believe in the conversation. So thoughts?
Yeah, those are great questions. And so one thing to be, like anything, is you can't, in this type of conversation, you can't force people to be interested, right? The reality is there are going to be a population of people who are very interested because they're personally impacted. And then there's a possibility of people who are very interested because they care about the people who are impacted. They work with or they are in a relationship with. So those would be coworkers, employees, or your supervisors. But then there's going to be a large set of people who this is a secondary, third, fourth, fifth priority for them, or maybe they're not thinking about it at all. And so I would say you got to start with the audience and to start with the group of people that it matters, right? And you might be an employee at a workplace where it doesn't matter. This conversation doesn't matter. And I would say I've been there. I feel you. I know Jina's been there. She feels you. And to be encouraged that you're coming to things like this to keep yourself encouraged, to keep yourself motivated and challenged. And if you feel like you have the patience and influence in your organization to begin raising questions, try to raise them as respectfully, as courageously, as boldly as possible to the highest levels of your organization that you believe you can influence through respectful and meaningful channels. But also that there are organizations out there that are in your industry or that you can work at that are having these conversations. And if you feel like you're hitting a wall and you don't have the patience to break through, then there are other organizations having this conversation. And that's the whole point of this, is Jina is highlighting companies, people, organizations that don't have all the answers, but we're creating environments where we care and we want to have these and we want to have meaningful impact in our realms of influence. And so I would start with people who care, and I would start with the organizations and the groups that care, and work your way out, and then work your way out to, okay, how do we invite and include people who don't seem to care, but don't make them also feel ostracized or that they can never be part of the conversation, because that's the last thing you want. The last thing you want is to turn a group of people off that weren't interested in the first place. You want to draw them in because they're part of your inclusion. They need to be part of your diversity and inclusion, right? So don't look at anybody as an enemy in this. Look at them all as opportunity to influence and to change and to help people learn. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and I'll just say thank you so much for what you just said. I talk to a lot of my clients about that because so often when we think about even that first article that said when we say diversity, we think racial diversity. White's not part of that conversation. And so you just said include everyone in the conversation. So I think that's great. And then you also said you don't have all the answers. But what I took from that is, but you're making space for people to ask the questions. Together, you're going to find answers, or you may never find answers, but it's exploring those questions that will bring you at least insights, information, recommendations, understanding. So how I know there's some questions here. I need to put my glasses on so I can read them. So I think this one is a good one to take now because I'm debating whether I should hold something till the end, but this one's good. So let's say you're a newly hired manager in a predominantly white or any culture small company, so a homogenous company. How would you introduce the idea of diversity and inclusion? I mean, is there a step that you can suggest, and maybe going back to what it is that you did with your company?
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, you're a new you're a new manager in an organization. Don't know how big it is, but you know, begin with, you obviously have influence amongst just your own reports, your own employees, in having the informal conversation that's not necessarily formalized, right? Beginning the listening exercise. Don't come in guns blazing, like a cowboy. You're still, as a new manager, learning culture. You're learning the culture of the company. So you want to make sure you understand that first. But beginning to talk to employees about this topic and asking them great questions. And then you have the influence of your peers, right? Your manager, there's other managers of your peers, talking to them about this topic. And oftentimes then the question leads to, well, then how do I bring this topic to step up to my boss, the one I report to, whether it's a director or VP or the president? And that's where the trepidation starts, right? That's where the fear of, okay, if I bring this up, I don't know them well enough yet. Are they going to be offended? Do they care? Well, be inquisitive. There's always a strategy of playing I'm the new guy. I'm just learning. I'm just growing. And so start with your reports, beginning to be inquisitive, asking how people are, especially if you have any employees that identify as BIPOC, asking them how they're doing, and how they've done over COVID. There's general ways to get into the conversation to hear and to really genuinely hear how people are doing with this topic. Begin with your peers then too after that, and then get to know your direct report, or the person you report to, your director or supervisor. Get to know them and get a sense first of, okay, maybe they're already thinking about this as well. You never know. Oftentimes you might think you're the only one. There may be advocates that are actually having this conversation already. So do some digging first.
Oh, what you just said is so important, because if you're not comfortable asking the question, or if you don't think anyone else around you cares, I think I heard somewhere that if one person asks a question, odds are there's at least 70% of the people in that same space have the same question, which means, and I don't know, who knows if that's even right, if I'm remembering it correctly. But what that tells us, though, is if you're wondering, someone else in your organization is probably wondering too. So inquiring, and I love your idea about, hey, I'm the new person here, I don't know. That actually gets you a lot of cover if you're new. And to be fair, you don't even have to be new in the organization. What if that manager is a newly promoted manager? And so they're trying to learn the lay of the land at this level. Now, that won't work when you go to the boss and say, I'm new here. That won't work. But I think that's a really powerful suggestion. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
And if you're in a large company and you're a new manager, oftentimes initiatives around this are started in the people ops group or HR. So a simple thing is taking out the HR leader to lunch and saying, hey, I wanted to learn about the strategy around diversity and inclusion that we have in recruiting, in HR and people ops, to see how they answer. It's the new guy, new gal question, right? It's like, I'm the new manager question. So I think that's the other piece is going to leaders and saying, hey, I'm just wanting to be a good manager. I'm wanting to align with the strategies we have. Can you tell me about any new strategies or anything that we've implemented over the past year in light of everything that's happened socially or light of COVID, whatever it is great cover, and it's a great opportunity for you to be inquisitive.
I have to make sure I'm paying attention to time. See, this is where I need to get a really big clock so I can see it without my glasses. That's probably my age is showing. So you've talked about BIPOC a lot, and you bring it up in terms of people of color. What about the other areas of dimensions of diversity? Because you actually mentioned at the beginning a lot of different areas. There's the LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
There's gender identity, which isn't necessarily the same thing as gender. There are people who are veterans and who are finally leaving the military and moving into private industry. There's a completely different work experience there that you have to accommodate or understand. Gender, I mean, not gender, well, gender, but there's also generational differences. We know that the majority of employees in the workforce today are millennial, but so much of the dialogue around D&I is, it really feels like it's targeting boomers and Gen Xers. So what about those other dimensions of diversity? And have you come across any of that in your companies?
Yeah, well, a big one is, and a big, frankly, a big workforce that we have had great success in recruiting and getting involved in our organization are former military or military spouses, family members of military. And there's a unique nature of that because we have primarily a business that's run remotely. Well, military and military spouses are used to a transient kind of movement of life where they follow assignments or follow special projects related to the military. And so having a job where they can work remotely, take it wherever they want, might become more normal during COVID and post-COVID, but at the time of our hiring, it wasn't normal. It was very difficult to find those kinds of jobs where a spouse felt like, oh, I have this skill set, I want to work, and I might be in Florida 1 month and I might be in Tennessee another. And so that was really important to us, and it helped us get into this a better understanding of the culture and the kind of worldview and the different backgrounds of military families and how their schedules and their lives are arranged around one of the biggest employers in the world, the government, right, and the military. And so that's huge, but also it brought different types of skill sets to the table that weren't traditional but were very valuable, right? And there is a huge segment of customers, veteran entrepreneurs, veteran small business owners. They have their own designation, their own funding sources, their own subsidies and incentives to start businesses. We serve those entrepreneurs as well. And so it allowed us to even be better at serving those entrepreneurs, to be able to connect and say, hey, some of our team members are former military or family members, and they can relate to your story. And actually, they're going to learn a lot from you too, because they may have family members wanting to start businesses out after they get out of the military. So that was a big one for us. And yeah, so there are different types of diversity that are not just related to BIPOC, that are really important.
What I loved about the example you just gave, though, is and I don't know if you intended to do this or not, but you really showed how when you go deeper into a dimension of diversity, what we know to be true in all these dimensions is there's much more to it. So on the surface, when you start, you're talking about a military spouse, which maybe sounds like it's a gender thing, but then you're talking about it not a gender thing, because the spouse could be the husband.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, check myself, Jina, for making that assumption. And then it was more about fluidity and movement, and the fact that although they may be moving around, they can still stick with the same position. Not only that, but they now could see into a marketplace. You were talking about veterans. They could see into a marketplace with unique understanding of that marketplace. And so under every dimension of diversity brings with it that type of depth and opportunity to it's a different lens on the same group. Mm-hmm. So I really love that example. Okay, now what I want to do in the interest of time, I'm going to move us formally to the Q&A section. Formally. But, and so there are some questions in here, so I want to tackle them, and then if we have time, we can come back to general stuff, but I also know sometimes questions trigger more.
And Jina,
yes.
Before we head into the Q&A, can we do a poll real quick?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Autumn.
Sure. All right, here is poll number 3. We will have one more remaining. Again, we'll leave this open for about a minute. How is your company addressing D&I? Go ahead and cast your vote.
I assume, Michael, you're watching the results coming in? And
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
seeing
Not
almost
sure.
half, yeah, not sure. And the next biggest chunk is providing training.
Interesting.
It's interesting because that's not necessarily bad. It just
Yeah.
presents those participants an opportunity to do what you were just saying, Michael, earlier, which is just go ask somebody. And if it's a peer, you can ask the peer if they know what's happening rather than having to ask your boss and reveal that you weren't paying attention at the last announcement, you know?
Right. Well, I think too, for small business, for small business owners and for small businesses, I know for myself, like the D&I is this formal language we're using around this conversation, but for most people, like they don't think in that lens, like
Yeah.
the formal words. For most people, they think very real in what's happening around them. They see what's happening on the streets or on the news, or what's happening to an employee or another, or happening to a family member. And so they think in light of that. And it is interesting that, after Not Sure training happens, our culture our culture is very much a training culture, like the West, especially accountants. Oh, we can solve it. We just need training. We can
You
solve it.
mean
We
that
just
in the
need,
nicest
yeah,
possible way, right, Michael?
yes, yeah. We just need training. Like, and I find honestly, like, conversation or being actually given the opportunity to be in the same room with somebody different, that's the best training you can get or receive. And that was, I think, probably a lot or most of my upbringing was always being in rooms with people that were not like me, and having, if in order to succeed, in order to begin learning to fit in, or to at least feel like I can connect, I had to reach out and be comfortable in asking questions and listening. And so if there is training, my encouragement for everybody is, the best kind of training you can get is to put yourself in front of someone else who's not like you, and to begin asking the naive, the innocent questions, and being okay with, hey, like, you might look naive, you might look ignorant. Yes, like that's the whole point. It's okay, you know. This is an opportunity to learn, and so, but that then engenders you, or you begin to create empathy and connection with the person you're learning from. And so that's a big piece of it. That, I think that's a big piece of it. And so for the not sures, my encouragement to you is, hey, go start having a conversation. Go take somebody out to lunch, go for coffee, and just begin asking questions.
Thank you. That's great. Next week, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about how to do that, because you said it's okay to be naive. That talks about vulnerability, and a lot of us aren't comfortable being vulnerable. And workplaces, corporate America hasn't traditionally respected those of us who show up vulnerable. So I recognize that that's harder to do than we say, but it's still a great suggestion. So this person says, as a white owner, I often feel that my efforts are seen as patronizing by BIPOC, as if they need a white person to help them. Do you have any suggestions there?
That's a great question. I think if you go back to the approach, right, your approach, and if you come at it with I don't have answers, all I have are questions, and you begin starting out with really listening to how are your how are people with different backgrounds and different than you feeling, and getting to know them and learn from them. If this is the first time you've ever had a conversation with your employee, don't start the conversation out with, hey, can you tell me about D&I or whatever, right?
What does
You
it
could
feel
start
like
with,
to be an Asian person? Because
yeah, how does it feel?
yeah.
Exactly. Like, how does it feel? How have you felt with, if you're just getting to know somebody for the first time because you've just not been a vulnerable leader or vulnerable boss, or you've not been inquisitive, just start with simple things like, hey, I'd like to start getting to know my employees better. I've not done a good job. can I take you out to lunch and get to know you? You got to start there.
Well, but
So
the thing, Michael, is
yeah.
if you and I went to Starbucks and we'd never known each other, we're going to learn about each other, and our race is going to be incidental. And
Yes.
what we're going to find out is we probably have more in common than we think. And then the race issue becomes even more, falls away even more. And so what I hear you saying is that if you're a boss and if you're worried that you're going to come off as patronizing, you're only going to come off as patronizing if you go to somebody and presume you have the answer.
Exactly.
But if you go to somebody and say, let's just talk, I want to get to know everybody here better, we're going to do one-on-ones, you're going to get to know people better.
Yes.
And when you know somebody better, you're more comfortable saying, all right, I have a question and I'm worried it's going to be a stupid question.
Yeah.
I'm even worried it might offend you a little bit, but I don't know how to ask it.
Yep.
And then ask the question if they give you permission to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And people are forgiving. More people than not are forgiving, especially you're coming genuinely with humility and vulnerability that you're wanting to learn and you don't have the answers. I sure didn't have the answers. And all the employees I talked to were more than gracious with me.
Somebody said, I think this is a comment, not a question, but it says, don't limit your market potential. Don't you limit your market potential? Oh, okay, sorry, I can't read. Don't you limit your market potential if you only sell to those who look like you? And why would anyone do that?
That's a great question. Well, there are practical reasons. There may be practical reasons why you sell to a group of people that are only like you. For example, in a religious context, you may be selling religious products only to a certain market, right? And if that religious context itself is not diverse with a lot of other ethnicities or backgrounds or whatever, then that's a practical issue. Or if you're selling baby products to a specific ethnic group because their particular ethnic group has unique issues with their babies, then that would make sense. But I think in this situation, Karen's saying, why would you do it intentionally knowing there's a diversity of customers to serve? And that's a great question, Karen. And yet we see many examples of that. There are many examples of that out there in the marketplace. Because you do have to provide a mechanism of inclusion in your marketing and sales approach to show that what you're offering is for everybody and that anybody's welcome to have and enjoy it and participate in it. So why would you do that? That's a great question. But it is an approach that some people take and that we see people take.
I would add to that I think some of it is also that the historical thinking and the traditions that have grown up in a particular industry were those that have been formed by men and or people who are white or both white men. And there's a lot of industry that's like that. In fact, and I don't know if people know this, but there's a lot of work that's been done more recently that's been revealed. Studies on women's biology, for example. 50 years ago, the test subjects were men. And it sounds crazy that today men would stand in as the test subjects for products that are intended for women. But that's because women weren't part of the dialogue. They weren't part of the process. And we now know, looking back, that that's not the case. And so part of the reason people might sell and limit their sales is because it's a blind spot.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize they're doing it because the people who have come up with the strategy and who have identified the market and developed the products to meet that market never realized how it might be landing on people other than the people who look like them. So I think there's an opportunity, if you see that in your company, for example, and whether you're a minority or not, you have an opportunity to bring this new thinking to the organization if your organization's open to it.
Right.
Because diversity of thought is another aspect of diversity. My experience with diversity in corporate America is that if it doesn't come from the top, it's almost a waste of time. Is this also true in a small business?
I would say that if with any organization, if it's not a priority at the executive level, it's not a priority. I mean, that's a reality. And so you're going to have a larger organization, obviously you can have spheres of priority, a priority of your team, priority of maybe a department. But if you want it to be company-wide, it has to be an executive level priority.
Autumn, have we done all of our polling questions yet?
We have one more remaining. Would you like to do that?
Sure, let's do that.
All right, here is our fourth and final poll. Where might D&I help differentiate your business? Recruiting new staff, reaching new customers, enhancing brand, something else, or you're not sure?
You know, it's funny, but we couldn't have timed these questions to the conversation any better, because we were just talking about how you would narrow what you offer to one group. And here we're recognizing that there are a lot of ways to differentiate companies leveraging diversity.
Great. We will keep this open for about 30 more seconds. It looks like we have about 68% voted.
And while the rest of the votes are coming in, a comment came in. Thank you, Tommy. It says, like, you're inviting American to eat ethnic foods like pho. And correct me, is that how you pronounce it, Tommy? Please come back in and say, it's pho, not pho, which is what Americans say. All right, our poll's wrapping up, I think.
Yes, closing this down here in 3, 2, and 1, sharing those last results with you. It looks like 28% was the most with recruiting new staff. Back to you.
So that's really good because, and thank you for sharing that. Recruiting has been a big area where companies have focused their D&I efforts. And partly is because you have to have diverse staff in order to do all of the things you're talking about. To leverage diversity, your staff have to be diverse. Mm-hmm. So we have about 3 minutes left, and I know we've got to give at least a minute or two to Maureen to wrap us up. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Just get started on the journey, ask questions, be inquisitive, and make it a long game, a part of the strategy of your business.
Thank you. So before we formally close, I just want to let everybody know that in 2 weeks, joining me next time is Laura Concannon, and she's a CPA in Baltimore. Laura and I know each other, and we go back several years, and we met because she actually reached out to me to ask what is really an uncomfortable question. But that uncomfortable question has since grown into professional connection and friendship. So we're going to be talking about that. How do you have an uncomfortable conversation? Michael was talking earlier about reaching out and asking. What does it feel like? We'll acknowledge that it's hard. I also want to share Michael's contact information is on this slide at the front, bio slide. And then my contact information is here. So if there are questions that you didn't get to ask or we didn't answer, feel free to reach out to us. And with that, we are officially done. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thank you.
And Autumn, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We here at CPA Academy will process your credit later today. That, along with a copy of this webinar and evaluation link, will be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours. I see some great comments coming in. Thank you so much for that. We're glad you enjoyed the presentation today. All questions asked will be forwarded in a full report to the presenter as well. Thanks again to our speakers, Jina and Michael, for their great discussion, and thanks to our members for your participation. Please check the schedule on our website for additional information, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.